So this is going to be more of a smorgasbord of a video because yesterday we saw the Montreal Canadiens play off against the Vancouver Canucks and pull off a really great comeback overtime win. Much to the dismay of many of my Vancouver brethren here in the Lower Mainland in BC, things are very, very rough for my Vancouver Canucks. But for my Habs, it's actually looking pretty alright, and I wanted to talk about some of the notes from yesterday, late after the game, as well as some of the notes from earlier this morning on Tuesday, January 7th. So let's start out with the big picture. The biggest conversation point that everybody has been bringing up in Montreal as of yesterday night and this morning. The Montreal Canadiens, because of yesterday's victory, they are officially in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. They've got 41 points in 40 games played, which is good enough for second wild card in the East. However, it should be noted that the Ottawa Senators actually do have a higher points percentage than Montreal. However, the Habs have 2 more games played and thus 1 more point. They're in the playoffs. The Sens, though, right on their tail. It is going to be really tight as the season continues, especially if the Habs continue winning. They're 8-2-0 in their last 10 after all. But just to see Montreal find themselves in this position in the first place, they clawed back over here, man. It took a while for them to get back into the playoff hunt. Tampa Bay is in the first wild card right now. They've got 42 points in 37 games played. They have a much better points percentage than the Boston Bruins, who are third in the Atlantic right now. So as the entire season continues, we'll see if Tampa is able to squeak into a top 3 spot in the Atlantic, if the Boston Bruins become a wild card team. The Bees have finally started getting things together, much to the dismay of me, because I already dropped Jeremy Swayman in fantasy. He had been terribly sucking the entire year for me, and it was more of an emotional pick for me to drop him instead of actually trying to leverage his status and trade him for something valuable. But either way, that's not really relevant. I just wanted to toss that in there because I love talking about my own fantasy squad, if that's not already apparent. Speaking about things that I love to talk about, we got some extra news to scour around the internet for when it comes to the Habs. But before we get into that, if you need a VPN, check out Express. They've got everything you need and more. Click the link in the description. It's the first one right there. It's an affiliate link. It helps me out. It helps you out. And everybody gets what they want. So big shout out, of course, to Express for all your VPN internet needs. Heading over to some of the other Canadiens updates, though, we had ourselves Renaud Lavoie speak earlier this morning on Le Club du Matin on BPM Sports YouTube channel with an update that we needed to hear when it comes to one Patrik Laine on the Montreal Canadiens. This article on HabsFanatics.com will also be linked in the description. It goes over what Renaud Lavoie says. This morning on BPM Sports with Max Lalonde and Gilbert Delorme, Renaud Lavoie said we should expect to see Patrik Laine back in action on Friday. Laine, who has been sick for a few days, should practice with the group this week. And I really wanted to dive into this because it's been kind of apparent to a lot of people, especially myself who has Laine in fantasy on like 7 of my 8 teams, that it is kind of weird to see a guy miss 3 games in a row because of the flu. Like, okay, missing 3 days at work, for example, because of the flu. That's not really like the worst thing in the world, but for an NHL player to miss that many games in the span of multiple days, it is more peculiar than not, and I think for a lot of Canadiens fans, it's been more of a whirlwind trying to project when Patrik Laine is going to come back. Because when you hear, oh yeah, it's a flu, okay, well, maybe he takes a day off or 2 days off of rest, and then he comes back, and then he plays, and maybe he doesn't look the best when he comes back, but he plays either way. But no, Laine just hasn't been playing, and now we're hearing from Renaud Lavoie that Laine might not even play until Friday. So give him another few more days of recovery time before he puts on that CH sweater once more. I mean, good on Laine and the Canadiens for making sure he's fully healthy before making his return to the lineup. I can't say the same thing about my Vancouver Canucks and Quinn Hughes, but still, this update was one that I think a lot of Canadiens fans wanted to hear, and is ultimately one that the team and the fan base does deserve. Let's head over to some other conversations, though, in regards to Canadiens. Guys, speaking about Jake Evans, because this was also talked about by Renaud Lavoie. He says on TVA Sports a few days ago, during the game against Colorado, that he had spoken with Jake Evans before the game in Chicago, and Jake Evans told him that he wants to be clear. Evans wants to continue his career in Montreal. Renaud also mentions the team wants to keep him. So this is a pretty big update. It's a trade update, I guess you could say, in regards to Jake Evans and his future with the Montreal Canadiens. A future that both the Habs and himself want to see continue, and a future that a lot of Canadiens fans were questioning as to whether or not it actually would happen. There were going to be debates, there were going to be questions because, would it be more appropriate for the Canadiens to trade Evans while his value is going up, and he's been playing super well the past little while. He's been playing with Armia, he's been playing with Emil Heineman. That line has been so dynamite for the Canadiens the past few weeks here, and I think a lot of Habs fans, especially on the more pessimistic side, were of the mindset that, hey, it's probably best to trade this guy, get some draft picks, because you don't know if he's going to come back, you don't know if it's guaranteed that he stays with your team. And so, hearing from the media that Evans does want to stay with the Montreal Canadiens, and that the Montreal Canadiens want to stay with Jake Evans, it does provide some sort of comfort. There are some replies in this tweet that say, what do you expect him to say? But at the same time, you have to acknowledge sometimes these teams and these players, these negotiations, they make it very obvious that there is no long-term future coming when the player shrugs it off. When he says, I'm just focused on the season right now, we'll get there when we get there, they go all Mr. Incredible on ya, we'll deal with that when it all comes to fruition. That's something that usually happens, honestly. Like, you see a lot of players defer contract discussion talk to the end of the season. It is maybe a little bit more rare to see a guy straight up say, I want to stay here. I don't want to leave. I want to re-sign with this team. Speaking about this team, one of the reasons that Jake Evans might want to re-sign is because of the young talent coming up in the roster. Because Lane Hutson, as we had talked about yesterday, he had a 3-point game against my Vancouver Canucks, and with that in mind, he now overtakes the lead in the rookie scoring race in the National Hockey League. Hutson, Mishkov, Celebrini, Siplakov, Stankoven and Gauthier, Emil Heineman, Will Smith, Kovalenko, Bolduc, and more. But Lane Hutson is the #1 point guy for all rookies in the National Hockey League, which includes a bunch of forwards. Now here's the thing. I will say, because Matvei Mishkov recently got scratched, because Macklin Celebrini was injured for a good chunk of the year, I honestly would probably say it's more likely that one of these two forwards overtakes Hutson in points over the next little while. But for now, it's a really great story to see Lane as the #1 rookie and a guy who's definitely been given his dues and who's been taking over this blue line. You just gotta wonder, if Lane Hutson was given #1 power play time right away, where would his point production be? He's obviously producing a lot more than Mike Matheson did last year, so for Matheson, obviously he's been fine, but Lane Hutson is just an entirely different animal. Hutson also is one of the top producing defensemen in the National Hockey League. He's got more points this season than Dahlin and Hedman. He's got the same amount of points this season as Bouchard and Fox. Only Theodore, Morrissey, Hughes, Werenski, and Makar have more points than Lane Hutson does on D this year. By the way, big shout out over to Zach Werenski. He has been a monster this season in the National Hockey League. But that's not the only thing that I wanted to talk about to end off this video. I wanted to go over one more news piece about another small player on the Habs. Let's talk about what Marty St. Louis said about Cole Caufield after yesterday's penalty. It would be easy for Caufield to just score goals, staying outside on the perimeter and not be physically implicated. We asked him to play much tougher. That was a moment he'd like to take back, but I didn't think that was a moment to give him a lesson. He's referring, of course, to the slashing call that Caufield had against Tyler Myers, which resulted in the game-tying goal for Vancouver, which allowed the game to go to overtime. It was a moment of anger and frustration for Caufield, but If he builds up that reputation that you can't shove him around because he's going to bite back at you, then I'd watch out if I were the rest of the league, because this is a guy with some bite. Talent on the ice and goal scoring, talent in terms of being able to set guys up, and also a snarl that might not ever have been there before. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about a lot of these Canadiens news and notes, from Laine's injury update to Jake Evans' trade update to the Lane Hutson scoring update to Cole Caufield and the standings and everything in between. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.